In the last video, we talked about the incredibly confusing topic of pass by reference and pass by value, but luckily in this video, we have a much simpler topic, which are handy array methods that allow you to work with arrays much better. And you may hear me use the word method or function. They're very similar things, but essentially what a method is, it's a function on an object or something else, while a function is its own standalone function. So here we have function, whatever the name is, and it does something on the inside. While if we have an object, so we could just say obj equals, and this has a function inside of it. For example, we give it a name and it does something inside of it. This function would be called a method because it's inside of an object, while this function here is called a function because it's standalone on its own. Really doesn't matter too much though. You can call them both functions, it doesn't make any difference, but just in case you hear me say method versus function, this is the distinction to be aware of. So now we're going to be talking about array methods, which are functions on arrays. So let's create an array. We'll say a equals, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And now we want to actually do something on there. So probably the most common array method that we're going to see is the for each method. So we can say a dot, and this is a method on the array. So we can say for each, make sure you have that capital E here. And what this for each method does is it takes a function, and we're going to use an arrow function in this case. And this function gets run once for each one of the elements inside of our array. And it's going to pass those elements to our array here. So we can say that this is going to be element, or you can call it item. In our case, we're going to call this number because each one of our elements in our array is a number. And then we can just come in here and do whatever we want. We can say console.log number. Now when we save, we get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 being printed out because this is just looping through each one of our numbers and printing them out. Also, this takes a second parameter if we want to use it, which is called index. And this index is just the place in the array that that element is. So you can see here, we have our parentheses around our number and our index, our two parameters, our arrow. And let's just log out number and index. There we go. So you can see, let me actually put these all in the same line. So we could say here we have number plus a space plus our index. And now it's safe. So we can see we have the number 1 with the index of 0, number 2, index 1, number 3, index 2, and so on. And this index over here is like how you would access the element in our array. For example, if we console logged a of 0, we should get this value 1 here. And if we save, you can see we do get the value 1. So index right here is just corresponding to what we had put in the brackets to access that particular element. So that's for each. It's very simple. We can loop through all of our elements and it'll do whatever we put inside of this function for each one of our different elements. And we can also access the index. Generally, you don't need the index though, so we're just going to get the number. Now we're going to move on to another function. This one is called map. And map is very similar to for each. It's going to loop through each one of the elements in our array. That's something that's going to be common across almost all of these array methods is they loop through the array and call a function. But this one is a little bit different. Instead of just looping through everything, what we do is we loop through everything and we return something from our function call. And this returned value is going to be the new updated value of that array. So let's say we wanted to take our array A and turn it into an array that looked like this, where it was, the value 2, 4, 6, 8, 8, and 10. We just want to double each one of our numbers. Well, we could use map to do that. So what we can do is we can say return number times 2. And what this is going to do is it's going to loop through each element in our array A, put it in this number variable. So for example, 1, and it's going to say 1 times 2, and we return that. And that's now the new first value of our array. Do the same thing with 2, 3, 4, and 5. And that's going to give us the new values for our first, second, third, fourth, and fifth element in our array. It just is returning the new value for that array. And map is interesting because it doesn't actually modify A. We come down here, we console.log A, you're going to see it's still 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, even though we've multiplied everything in our array by 2. And that's because this returns a brand new array for us. It doesn't actually modify our current array, it returns a new array to us to avoid all those confusing reference problems I talked about in the last video. So we're going to call this new A. And now let's log out. Down here, new A. Now you can see new A has 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, because we're just multiplying each number in our array by 2. Could change this to multiply by 5, and now we have 5, 10, 15, 20, and 25. So we can modify the elements in our array by using map, and it's going to return to us a brand new array that contains these different elements. I love map, it's incredibly useful, and you're going to see it all over the place when you are working with arrays. Now let's take, for example, another method. This one is called filter, and filter is pretty self-explanatory. We want to take our array A, and we want to filter it down to only select values. Let's say this array B here again, we want to filter only the values that are less than 3. So we want our new array to be the values of 1 and 2. Well, with filter, all you need to do is return true or false on if you want to keep the value in your array. If you return true, it is going to keep everything in your array. So if you turn true here, you can see our array is still 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If we return false, it's going to say don't keep that value in our array. So in our case, our array is now empty. There's nothing in it because every value is set to false here. What we want to do is we want to check our current number, and if it is less than or equal to 2, for example, 1 or 2, we want to keep it. This will return true if it's less than or equal to 2. Otherwise, it'll return false if our number is greater than 2. Now when we save, our new array only has the value of 1 and 2 in it. And if we want to reverse this, we just come in here and say greater than 2, and now we have only the values greater than 2, which is 3, 4, and 5. So far we've talked about for each, which allows us to loop through all the elements in our array and just do whatever we want. It doesn't return anything, it just allows us to loop through them. Then we talked about map, which allows us to loop through our elements and return a brand new array where we perform some type of operation on each element. For example, multiplying by 2, adding 1, dividing by 10, whatever it is we want to do. And now we've talked about filter, which again loops through all of our different elements, and it allows us to filter down our list into a new list that only contains the elements we want. For example, elements greater than 2, elements less than or equal to 2. And like I said, with all of our other methods, this does not modify A. Our A is still 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but it returns to us a brand new array, which has the values 3, 4, and 5. Again, circumventing that really annoying pass by value, pass by reference talk that we had in the last video. Now, very similar to filter, we have this method called find, and find is a little bit different. It takes a function just like before and it loops through all of the elements in our array, but as soon as we return true from here, it returns that element. So it tries to find the first element that matches this. So if we did number greater than 2 here, this is going to return to us a particular number we'll call m, and we'll log out this n here. And you'll see n is 3. And essentially what this does is the first time this function returns true, it stops looping through our array and it returns the actual number that we're on. So what happens is we go through here, 1 is greater than 2, that's false, go to the next one, 2 is greater than 2, that's also false, go to the next one, 3 is greater than 2, okay, that's true, return 3 and just stop executing. It doesn't matter that 4 and 5 are also greater than 2, it just goes in order from the front to the end and returns the first one that matches this scenario. So instead of returning to us an array, this returns to us a single element from our array, and it's great for finding an individual element in our array. These are probably the 3 or 4 most common array methods that you're going to use, but there's still some other ones that are incredibly useful. For example, the sum function. If we say a.sum, this is going to take a function, loop through all of the elements in our array, and it's asking, are any of the elements in your array matching this function, in our case, this number? So we could say, do any of the elements in an array, are they greater than 2? And this is going to return to us true or false. So we'll just say is true, and we'll print out is true. So you can see that this returns to us true because at least one of the elements in our array A is greater than 2. If we were to change this to, for example, 9 or 8, none of the elements in A are greater than 2. So if we save this, it's going to return false. Because with .sum, we're saying at least one element in our array returns true for this calculation. Only one of them, it could be more than one, but it has to be at least one of them returns true for sum to return true. If all of them return false, then .sum returns false. This is just saying, do some of the elements in the array match this function? There's the inverse of this essentially where we say every, and what this is saying is, does every single one of our numbers match this equation? So in our case, if we change this back to greater than 2, we get false being returned because only some of the numbers in our array are greater than 2, but not every number. If we were to change this to greater than 0 though, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 are all greater than 0, so this now returns true because every single element in A completes this function and returns true. Now, one of the more confusing functions that I want to talk about is going to be the reduce function. And the way that reduce works is what you're doing is you're taking your array and you're reducing it down to one singular value by looping through it and doing something each time. And this actually takes at least 2 parameters. The first one is going to be our previous value. And generally you might call this the accumulator. In our case, we're going to call this the sum because we're going to add up all the numbers in our array. And the second element here, the second parameter here in our function is just going to be the number itself that we've been using before. So now we have our sum. This is the total, the previous value. This is whatever we return from this function here. And then with reduce, this takes a second argument down here, which is going to be the initial value we set our sum to. So this first property. In our case, we're going to start our sum out at 0. And what we want to do is we want to take our current sum, which starts out at 0, and we want to add our number to it. In our case, this is going to take our sum, which is 0, add our first number, which is 1, and then we return that. So we return 0 plus 1, which is 1, and whatever we return from here is now our new sum. So then next time we go through this, our sum is 1 and our number is 2. So we do 2 plus 1, which is going to give us 3. So now our sum is 3. Our number is 3 because it just moves down our list. We have 3 plus 3 is 6. So sum is 6. Number is going to be equal to 4 up here. So we get 6 plus 4 is 10. Sum is 10. Number is 5. And finally, 5 plus 10 is going to give us 15. So this right here is going to be our sum. We'll just call it S. And if we log out S, we're going to get 15. Now again, this is very confusing how this works, I think. But the best way to think about it is this value we supply down here is just the default for our first parameter in our function for reduce, in our case, our sum. Then every time we return from this function, we're just setting the next value for our sum. So in our case, 0 is our first value, then 0 plus 1 gives us 1, so we get 1 here, and all the way until the end. And in order to reiterate this reduce, I want you to actually take in this array, which we're just going to call items. We're going to set it to an array, and these are going to be different objects. We're just going to have a price, and the price is just going to be a number. So we'll say 10 for this one. When I copy this down quite a few times, this one's going to have a price of 20, we'll say 14, 1, and 6. So we have all of these different items together here. And what I want you to do is use this reduce function in order to get the price, the total price of all these items added together. And this is maybe a little bit confusing. It's taking what we've learned with reduce so far and kind of adding a step to it. So it's perfectly okay if you don't understand how to do this right away, but give it a chance, pause the video right here, and then I'm going to show you how to do it in just a little bit. So hopefully you've had a chance to try this out yourself. Let's just say here const total is going to be equal to our array, which is called items dot reduce. And what we know is we're going to have our previous value, which is our sum of all of our different prices. So we're going to call this our sum. And then we have each one of our individual items that we're looping through. And then we want this to be our function. And in here, we need to make sure that we return whatever our current sum is. We want to add that onto our current price of our item. So we can say item.price. This is going to get the price of our item, in our case 10, 20, 14, 1, 6, and it's going to add it to this sum variable, and then it's going to return that into our total. And we want to make sure we default our sum to 0 at the very beginning. So now we just console.log out our total. You can see we get 51, and if we add these up, 10 plus 20 is 30, plus 14, we get 44, plus 7 is going to be 51. So now let's go on to our very final array method I want to talk about. This one is the easiest one of all, I think. So we're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And all we're going to do is say a.includes, and all we need to do is pass in any element we want, in our case 2. And this is saying, does a include true? So we can say const is true, and we can just console.log is true. And you can see a does include the value 2, so this is true. We can check, does it include 6? And we get false because there's no 6 in this array, obviously. Super straightforward, you just pass it a value, and it checks if that value exists inside of your array. And those are all of the most popular array methods that you're going to see all the time. I highly recommend you try out some of these array methods, just play around with them a little bit, see how exactly they work. They're all very similar, but of course they have different use cases for each one. Now in the next video, we're going to dive a little bit away from variables because we're going to be talking about a special way to write strings, which allows you to do really cool things, and I can't wait to see you in that video.